Welcome to the Taking Care of Tutu podcast. I'm your host, Meg Obanoff, and today we have Richard McDonald as our guest. Richard, you were, I think, listening to the podcast, or at least reading the emails about the podcast, and you reached out when we were doing our Veterans Month because it turns out you have a bunch of experience working with veterans yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you were doing that work on the mainland or not until you got to Maui?
Not until I got to Maui.
Okay, tell us how you got here to do it. Tell us how you got here to do that work.
Okay, from 1977 to 1980, I was at Kahului Marine Corps Air Station. And during my last year, I got my master's in counseling psychology. And I took up a job to become a psychiatric aide at the Hawaii State Hospital over on Oahu.
Yeah.
And was amazingly, I got a job to become a rehab counselor on Maui. That's how I got here. I wrote a bunch of articles for the Maui News and made presentations at the state mental health facilities and the University of Hawaii. And we established, along with Don Mitsuyuki, veteran student resource centers at Maui Community College.
Yeah.
So these things were all trying to help people understand the difficulties that these veterans were experiencing and how best to help them.
And it's part of the purpose of doing groups as opposed to, or in addition to individual counseling, to try to connect the vets with each other so they have this understanding that this is not unique to them, that there's a bunch of other people going through a similar thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It made a big difference. I mean, I used to go over to, I held several groups on Maui. I also used to go over to Molokai. And the only place I could meet with them was out in a field.
Oh,
the first thing I had to tell them to do was not to bring your weapons.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of them, sometimes they would smoke pot just to try to mellow out and talk. And it actually, the counseling sessions helped a lot. But what was most helpful was my ability to write independent living plans for these. This was something that the VA mandated for our veterans who were so disabled that they couldn't work. We were mandated to, if we felt we could enhance their psychosocial functioning, which is where they were most severely impaired, to write a plan if we felt we could do that. And what I did through these plans was I would help them find something that they could do with their time that they were really interested in, where they could be productive and creative and help other people.
Richard, there wasn't really groups of Vietnam vets getting together on a regular basis?
Only through groups that I held when I was a contractor. And again, when I became an actual employee with the VA. Which
that was, of course, to try to combat the isolation.
Yes.
Or counteract, I shouldn't say combat, counteract the isolation.
Right. My mission basically was to help them become aware that that the ongoing structures they were having in civilian life derived primarily from their prolonged participation in the traumatic and insidious conditions they served in Vietnam was. So this helped reduce the negative stigma when what was really most insane was the carnage, losses, and suffering they experienced in Vietnam. As well as
you're explaining to them that they were having difficulty sort of fitting into civilian society as a result of what they experienced in combat and in their service.
Yes.
And that hadn't been told to, and it feels, looking at it now in hindsight, it feels so shocking that hadn't been discussed before, but that was a new idea at that time. And you said your department was the rehab, and they were thinking the mental health department should be doing those plans.
Yes.
But it seems like rehab is what you were doing with those independent living plans.
but only.
And mental health doesn't sound like they were equipped to do it. They were equipped to do one-on-one counseling and med monitoring.
Yeah. And one of the differences was because I worked at the Maui CBOC in the same office with our mental health professionals, I was able to work real closely with them.
Right. You would get their input on the plan. Right.
Nowhere else was that going on.
Of course. That makes sense.
I even got, as a way to, the people that were denying the plans were saying that they were medically unnecessary. They weren't doctors. So I went to the mental health professionals and they wrote my plans into their mental health treatment plans, which made them necessary.
Right.
Still taking 7 months to get them approved.
That's so long.
And the vet, it was exacerbating the PTSD because they couldn't understand why. So I went to Dr. Cheryl Church, who headed up the independent living program and who told us, come to her if you're having problems, which I did. And she told me, look, just send the plans to me. If I approve them, that'll get them through the process more quickly.
And she was in Hawaii or she was in DC?
She was in DC.
Okay,
She was with us. Okay, so I thought, God, this is great. I told my boss, he said, that's fine. But then a week later, to get himself off something he had done wrong, he blamed me for going to her without consulting with him first, even though that's what we were told to do. And he had me officially reprimanded for doing so.
I see.
That didn't stop me. No other counselors were doing any more plans from that point on, except myself, and I kept doing it right up until I retired in 2018. And
so how many years were you doing those independent living plans for vets?
I was helping with the independent living plans from 1996 as a contractor and 2001 all the way till 2018.
Wow, great. So 22 years of independent living plans. That's a lot of veterans.
So
it sounds like the creation of the independent living plan and your advocacy around why that was so important is really kind of, I would say it sounds like that's a legacy of the work that you did.